Jesus was creative consciousness, but the world still kneels before distant altars seeking what already dwells within. For centuries, countless souls have prayed to something far away, something beyond reach, something external. Yet the truth whispered through time challenges everything these prayers assume. In the lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this truth is presented with radical clarity. The creative power once attributed to a distant God is, in fact, the consciousness within every human being. This is not blasphemy. This is liberation. When someone lifts their hands toward heaven, begging for miracles, they unknowingly reject the very power that could transform everything. The act of asking a distant God implies separation, dependence, powerlessness. It assumes that divinity exists somewhere else, outside the self, unreachable except through pleading. But what if that assumption itself is the barrier? What if the very act of seeking outward is what keeps transformation at bay? These questions are not meant to disturb faith, but to awaken it to its fullest expression. The creative consciousness that moved through Jesus was not exclusive to him. It was the full awakening of what exists dormant within all humanity. He did not possess something others lack. He recognized something others ignore. In every moment of his life, Jesus embodied the understanding that consciousness creates reality, that imagination shapes form, that the inner state determines the outer world. This was his secret. This was his power. And it remains available to anyone willing to turn their gaze inward instead of outward. How many prayers have been sent into the void, hoping something out there will respond? How many hours spent in worship of an external force, waiting for intervention that never comes? The pain of unanswered prayers is real and profound. But perhaps the silence is not rejection. Perhaps it is an invitation to realize where the true power resides. When a person prays to something outside themselves, they affirm their own separation from divinity. When they recognize consciousness as the creator, they step into the role they were always meant to inhabit. This shift is not about abandoning spirituality but deepening it beyond rituals and traditions. The lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard reveal that Jesus embodied the principle of creative consciousness fully alive. He was not a distant savior to be worshipped from afar. He was a living demonstration of what becomes possible when consciousness awakens to its own creative authority. And every human being carries this same potential, waiting only for recognition. The question is not whether divinity exists but where it is sought. And the answer transforms everything. The law of assumption, as taught through the lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, reveals that consciousness is the only reality. Everything experienced in the external world is a reflection of an internal state. This is not metaphor or philosophy but the fundamental mechanism of existence. When Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within, he was not speaking poetically. He was describing the creative laboratory where all manifestation begins. The world outside mirrors the world inside with absolute precision. To change one is to change the other. Most people live as if reality happens to them, as if circumstances are imposed by forces beyond their control. They see themselves as victims of fate, luck, genetics, economy, or divine whim. But this perspective inverts the truth. Consciousness does not react to reality. Consciousness creates reality. Every condition, every relationship, every material circumstance originated first as a state of being within. The person who understands this stops asking the world to change and begins changing the consciousness that authors the world. This is the great inversion. Imagine a mirror that reflects whatever stands before it. The reflection cannot change unless what stands before the mirror changes first. No amount of effort applied to the mirror itself will alter the image. This is how consciousness works in relation to the physical world. The outer world is the mirror, consciousness is what stands before it. To beg the reflection to change is futile. To alter what the mirror reflects, one must change the state of consciousness creating the reflection. This understanding dissolves years of frustration and unanswered prayers. Bruce Lipton's research in epigenetics confirms what spiritual teachers have known for millennia. Beliefs and perceptions directly influence biological reality. The environment does not control the cell. The cell's perception of the environment controls its response. Similarly, external circumstances do not control human experience. Consciousness interpreting those circumstances determines the experience. When someone assumes a new identity, a new state of being, the biology, emotions, thoughts, and eventually the external world rearrange to match. This is not wishful thinking. This is documented science meeting ancient wisdom. How often does someone look at their life and feel trapped by conditions that seem unchangeable? How many times has the thought arisen that transformation is possible for others but not for oneself? These feelings are valid and deeply human. But they are also symptoms of a consciousness that has not yet recognized its own creative authority. The pain of feeling powerless is real. The frustration of unanswered prayers is real. Yet both dissolve the moment awareness shifts from seeking external salvation to embodying internal transformation. This shift is the beginning of everything. Jesus did not perform miracles by appealing to something outside himself. He performed miracles by embodying states of consciousness aligned with the desired outcome. When he healed the sick, he did not beg a distant God for intervention. He assumed the state of wholeness and reflected it back to those who believed. When he calmed the storm, he did not petition the heavens. He entered the consciousness of peace, and the external world conformed. Every miracle was a demonstration of consciousness shaping reality, not pleading with it. In the lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this principle is called living in the end. It means inhabiting the feeling of the wish fulfilled before the external evidence appears. It means assuming the identity of the person who already has what is desired, not the person still seeking it. This is not pretending or denying current circumstances. This is recognizing that consciousness precedes form, and by changing consciousness, form must follow. The person who lives in the end does not wait for permission from the world. They grant permission to themselves. Consider the ocean and its waves. The waves rise and fall, appearing separate and distinct, yet they are never apart from the ocean itself. Every wave is the ocean expressing itself in temporary form. Similarly, individual consciousness is not separate from universal consciousness. It is the same creative force localized in human experience. When someone identifies only as the wave, they feel small, fragile, limited. When they recognize themselves as the ocean expressing through the wave, everything changes. Power, peace, and creative authority become natural. What happens when a person spends their entire life asking a distant God for help, never realizing they are the very consciousness through which God creates? What happens when they finally understand that their imagination is not separate from divine power but the instrument of it? This realization is not sacrilege. It is the fulfillment of every sacred teaching ever given. It is the awakening Jesus demonstrated and invited all to experience. And it is available now, not in some distant future or afterlife, but in this moment. The great tragedy is not that people fail to receive answers to their prayers. The great tragedy is that they never realize they are the answer. Every time someone imagines a better life and feels it real within, they activate the creative force that shapes worlds. Every time they assume a new state of being and persist in it, they set reality in motion to match. The power has never been absent. It has only been misunderstood, projected outward when it resides within. And once this is seen, nothing remains the same. In John chapter 14, verse 12, a statement appears that has puzzled theologians and believers for centuries. The verse declares that anyone who believes will do the works Jesus did, and even greater works than these. Each word of this passage carries profound implications when understood through the lens of consciousness. This is not a promise reserved for saints or mystics. This is a direct confirmation that the creative power Jesus embodied is inherent in all human beings. The works he performed were not supernatural exceptions but natural expressions of awakened consciousness. When the text says anyone who believes, it is not referring to intellectual belief or religious affiliation. In the lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, belief means assumption, the state of consciousness accepted as true. To believe is to embody, to feel, to live from a certain inner conviction. Jesus performed miracles because he assumed the consciousness of the miracle already accomplished. He did not hope or wish. He knew. And that knowing was the creative force that brought form into alignment. This is the belief that moves mountains, not hoping they will move but knowing they already have. The phrase even greater works carries staggering implications. It means the potential within human consciousness exceeds even what Jesus demonstrated. It means there is no limit to what awakened awareness can accomplish. Yet for centuries, this verse has been interpreted as metaphor or distant prophecy, not as immediate practical instruction. The reason is clear. Accepting this truth requires abandoning the idea of a distant, controlling God and embracing the reality of consciousness as the creative authority. This shift terrifies those who cling to external saviors, but it liberates those ready to awaken. How many people have read this verse and felt unworthy, incapable, disqualified? How many have believed it applied to someone else, somewhere else, some other time? The pain of feeling excluded from divine power is one of the deepest wounds humanity carries. But that wound exists only because of misunderstanding. The moment someone recognizes that consciousness is the creator, that imagination is the divine instrument, that assumption shapes reality, the wound heals. Worthiness is not earned. It is recognized. Power is not granted. It is embodied. This passage does not ask anyone to worship Jesus as separate or superior. It invites everyone to recognize what he recognized, to embody what he embodied, to create as he created. The distance between human and divine collapses when consciousness awakens to its own nature. In that awakening, prayers cease being pleas sent outward and become decrees issued from within. Reality stops being something endured and becomes something authored. And the works, the miracles, the transformations that follow are not gifts from above but expressions from within. This is the truth hidden in plain sight. When consciousness awakens to its creative authority, the entire experience of life transforms. What once seemed like random events or divine tests reveals itself as patterns created by inner states. The person who blamed circumstances, other people, or bad luck suddenly sees that every condition was a reflection of consciousness held. This realization can feel overwhelming at first. It carries responsibility. But it also carries freedom. Because if consciousness created the current reality, consciousness can create a new one. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is final. Everything is fluid. Manifestation is not about manipulating the external world through techniques or rituals. It is about assuming the state of consciousness that naturally produces the desired outcome. In the lessons learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this is called living from the end. A person does not try to attract money. They assume the consciousness of abundance. They do not beg for love. They embody the feeling of being loved. They do not hope for healing. They dwell in the state of wholeness. The shift is internal, but the results are external. The world has no choice but to conform to consciousness. Consider the woman who has prayed for years for financial freedom, yet continues to feel broke, anxious, and desperate. Her prayers go to a distant God, but her consciousness remains rooted in lack. Every thought, every emotion, every assumption reinforces poverty. The outer world simply mirrors this inner state with perfect accuracy. Now imagine she stops asking outward and starts assuming inward. She begins to feel wealthy, to imagine abundance as natural, to carry herself as someone who lacks nothing. Without changing a single external circumstance, she has changed the consciousness creating those circumstances. And reality must shift. Or consider the man who has begged for healing but identifies deeply with illness, speaks of his disease constantly, researches symptoms obsessively. His consciousness is saturated with sickness. His prayers contradict his assumptions. He asks for health while assuming disease. The external body reflects the internal state. But if he shifts consciousness, if he begins to feel whole, to imagine vitality, to assume wellness as his natural state, the body begins to reorganize. This is not denial of symptoms. This is recognition that consciousness precedes biology. And when consciousness changes, biology follows. How many desires have been prayed for without ever being assumed? How many dreams have been hoped for without ever being embodied? The gap between asking and receiving is the gap between wishing and assuming. Jesus did not wish the sick into health. He assumed their wholeness and spoke it into being. He did not hope for bread and fish to multiply. He gave thanks before the evidence appeared, living from the consciousness of abundance already present. This is the secret. This is the path. And it is open to anyone willing to stop seeking outward and start creating from within. The moment someone truly grasps that consciousness is the creator, not the creation, the entire foundation of existence shifts. Every belief about powerlessness, victimhood, and external control crumbles. What remains is a profound and sometimes unsettling responsibility. The recognition that the life being lived was authored from within, not imposed from without. This is not a teaching meant to blame or shame. It is a teaching meant to liberate. Because if consciousness created what is, consciousness can create what will be. The power has never been absent. It has only been misunderstood. Imagine a theater where the actor forgets they are performing and believes the stage is the entire world. They react to other characters as if those characters have independent power. They feel trapped by the script as if it were written by someone else. But the moment the actor remembers they are not the character, that the stage is not reality, that the script can be rewritten, everything changes. Freedom floods in. This is what happens when consciousness awakens. The world is the stage. The identity is the character. The script is the assumption. And the author has always been within. Joe Dispenza's work on neuroplasticity reveals that the brain does not distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a physical one. When someone imagines an outcome with emotion and detail, the brain fires the same neural networks as if the event had occurred. This means assumption is not passive fantasy. It is active creation. When a person assumes a new state, feels it real, dwells in it consistently, the brain rewires, the body responds, and the external world rearranges to match. Consciousness does not wait for permission from reality. Consciousness commands reality into form. Where does one begin when the old way of living has been built on asking outward instead of creating inward? The beginning is simple but profound. Recognize the I am as the creative force. Every statement that follows I am is a declaration of identity, and identity shapes experience. I am broke creates poverty. I am sick creates illness. I am unworthy creates rejection. But I am abundant creates wealth. I am whole creates health. I am loved creates connection. The words spoken after I am are not descriptions of reality. They are instructions to consciousness, and consciousness obeys without question. What becomes possible when someone stops praying to a distant God and starts embodying the state of the answered prayer? What opens when the search for external salvation ends and the recognition of internal authority begins? These are not rhetorical questions. They are invitations to experience the shift firsthand. The life that unfolds from awakened consciousness is not one of struggle and waiting. It is one of natural manifestation, effortless alignment, and continuous creation. This is what Jesus demonstrated. This is what Neville taught. And this is what every human being is capable of realizing right now. There is a practice that can shift everything, not through effort but through alignment. It begins with stillness, with closing the eyes and turning attention inward. In that quiet space, away from the noise of the world, consciousness becomes aware of itself. The practice is not to ask, not to beg, not to plead with something outside. The practice is to assume the feeling of the wish already fulfilled. To imagine the desired reality with such clarity and emotion that it feels more real than the present circumstances. This is not pretending. This is creating. Let the body relax completely, releasing all tension and resistance. Then imagine the desired outcome as if it has already happened. Feel the relief, the joy, the gratitude, the peace that comes with fulfillment. Do not focus on how it will happen or when. Simply dwell in the feeling of it being done. Repeat a simple affirmation if it helps anchor the state. It is finished. I am whole. I am free. I am loved. Whatever words resonate with the heart, let them echo softly within. Stay in this state as long as possible, allowing consciousness to saturate in the new assumption. This practice is not a one-time event, but a daily discipline. Every morning, before the world imposes its demands, return to this inner space. Every night, before sleep takes over, revisit the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Over time, this assumed state becomes natural, automatic, the default identity. And as it does, the external world has no choice but to reflect it. This is not magic. This is law. Consciousness creates reality with absolute precision. The only question is what consciousness is assuming. If this resonates, if something within recognizes this truth, consider subscribing and activating notifications. Not to follow blindly, but to continue this journey of awakening together. Share this with someone who has been praying to a distant God, exhausted from unanswered pleas, ready to discover the creative power within. Transformation is not reserved for the chosen few. It is the birthright of every conscious being. And it begins the moment someone stops seeking outward and starts creating from within. Jesus was creative consciousness fully awakened, but that same consciousness resides in every human being. The difference is not in the power available, but in the recognition of it. Those who see it transform their world. Those who ignore it remain bound by circumstances they unknowingly author. The choice has always been internal. The power has always been present. And the life waiting to be lived has always been one assumption away. When the search for a distant God ends, the discovery of the Creator within begins. And in that discovery, everything becomes possible.